Welcome, one and all, to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And I just realized, Phil, we did a lot of discussion of various things. Somehow, we innately felt no need whatsoever to prepare ourselves for the main event. I don't think we said two words about it in all of our prep talk. But on today's episode, we are going to be discussing Derrick Lewis versus Olynyk. I'm never 100% sure how to pronounce it or how to spell it. Also on that card, Chris Weidman versus Omari Akhmadov, which we did spend a good bit of time talking about. Very weird fight. And at middleweight, so you know it is just right up our alley. We've also got Beneil Dariush fighting Scott Holtzman. Nosferatu Haqparast is fighting Alexander Munoz, sort of up-and-coming wrestler on the prelims. And, of course, we are going to revisit Derek Brunson versus Edmund Shahbazian, and Phil's prophetic, I don't know. You didn't say it confidently. I mean, we both picked Shahbazian, right? But, you were very correct in wondering, at least, if Edmund Shahbazian, like so many jab-based MMA fighters before him, would completely forget his jab the moment he finally faced a southpaw. And
always gamble on MMA fighters being bad.
Boy and howdy did it happen. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to become very ecstatic and happy discussing Derek Brunson's improvements. On the flip side, he looked great. Certainly by Derek Brunson standards, he looked like an absolute genius. And I really enjoyed it. So heavyweights, Phil. Heavyweights. How do you feel about Derrick Lewis right now? I mean, do you resent him?
Yes.
For trying to be good?
Yes. 100%. I resent him trying to be good. And I also resent that, thanks to the vagaries of fate, he's now on the same card as Kevin Holland.
That's true. We will get to that as well. But I can't believe I didn't mention it, but it was a tragic fucking weekend. For us in particular, because the two fights we were most anticipating did not happen. Ed Herman, and also they all got ripped off by the fucking UFC, so big old middle finger to Dana White. But now Kevin Holland has been moved to this upcoming card. Why do you consider that? Is it because they're both trying to be good now?
No, I mean, I just don't want Derrick Lewis to influence Kevin Holland into being too good. I don't want him to look at Derrick Lewis and see like an aspirational figure, to see someone that he wants to be like and just think, oh, this person's made the transition from being a meme to being a consistent quality fighter. No. No, Kevin Holland.
I would rather
avert your eyes, young man.
I would rather that Kevin Holland look at Derrick Lewis and start aspiring to fight at heavyweight. I would like that to be his takeaway. I think he might become champion at heavyweight. So yeah, Derrick Lewis and his fight with Ilir Latifi, definitely different. He's slimmed down, notably, in the last two fights. That has stood out. He's looked much lighter on his feet, much more just sort of lean and muscular. What has actually changed in his approach to fighting, though? What's changed in his technique or his style?
I mean, he's just actively defending takedowns a lot more. He's getting underhooks and, like, fighting grips and not just sort of falling over and looking upset and then eventually bench pressing the other guy off him.
My question is, does that make the game less functional? Like, Derek...
But he's also like conserving his energy, and we saw in his previous fight, who was that again?
Not Latifi.
Ivanov.
Yeah.
He was like using a jab and setting Ivanov up for things. I'm not sure if I like it.
It's kind of hard for me to put my finger on what has changed completely, though. I mean, maybe because my most recent memories of the Latifi fight, which was in many ways a classic Lewis performance, like, he did get taken down a few times. Granted, Latifi went for a lot of takedowns, and Lewis did stuff several of them. But a lot of his output was like, the big like jumping left high kick that he loves for no reason, and flying knees and stuff like that. And maybe this was because Latifi, being so weird himself, brought the weirdness back out of Derek, whereas Ivanov is a very like by the book, meat and potatoes kind of striker. But how does any of this match up against Alexei Olynyk? The bungalow man himself.
I mean, I think it just makes his window for winning much more narrow. I mean, when Lewis first came to the UFC, his sort of general lackadaisical nature did open him up to being clobbered a lot more than it does nowadays. I mean, Ivanov was a sort of reasonably tricky, tough style matchup for someone who was just going to counter Lewis when he came forward. Mm-hmm. But he still managed to diffuse that relatively well. I mean, but the days of him getting just shocked out of the gate, I think, are pretty much gone.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing, is that all it matters is for the margins to be narrow enough. Because, like, Walt Harris against Olynyk, for example, Walt Harris's grappling has not improved at all.
Yeah.
He is no better. But all it mattered that he was on the feet for long enough that he was able to blow a man who is like 85 years old out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis is a better grappler than Walt Harris. He is a much better grappler than Walt Harris. And has the same ability to just murder Olynyk instantly.
Yeah, it does feel that way. I mean, the only thing I'll say is that Olynyk likes to pressure, if it can be called that. He is the heavyweight version of a swarmer, really. Just like head down, barrel forward, throwing them bungalows. And Derek still does love to have his back to the fence. Much more so than Walt Harris. He's like one aspect of the style change for Derrick Lewis has been keeping that Ngannou distance more often, cause it's not like he's developed much better footwork. He's still like Derek Brunson, who we'll be talking about later, stands like almost straight legged and flat footed. I think he just starts from farther away more often now. And is trying to develop tools that work better from that range. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, if when Olynyk is gonna back him up, he's gonna force Derrick Lewis to exchange, but probably that results in his demise, if we're honest.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth considering, like, how many people has Lewis ever beaten in the UFC that you would actually characterize as aggressive?
Right.
Because the answer is pretty much zero.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Junior was over aggressive.
Yeah, but he lost to him.
He lost that one. I forgot. Junior just looked bad. Ooh. It's a very good question. I guess Travis Brown was really recklessly aggressive. And
Travis Brown was also whooping his ass.
Yes, he was. Well, that's the thing. I mean, even if Olynyk has the right dynamic, he's probably just going to get knocked out. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason to pick Derrick Lewis. But yeah, you're right. Like, he hasn't even fought that many people at all who could be considered aggressive. Not to say nothing for beating them.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think Olynyk will make it a fight, and that's more interesting for Derrick Lewis, because I think the technical Derrick Lewis is, like most fighters' adjustments, merely a facade. It's a pretty thin veneer, I think, that you push through that first layer, and it turns out that the swangin' and bangin' still lurks behind the curtain. So we shall see. But I'm going to go ahead and pick Derrick Lewis to knock somebody out because that's a thing that he likes to do.
Yeah, I mean, I just hope it's funny. I mean, that's all you can really hope from these fights. I mean, it's following the UFC's, what I'm increasingly dubbing the Triple H maxim, which is heavyweights and Holly Holm. Like, they're just the default for main events when you don't have anything else good to put on. And yeah, let's hope that it's either over quickly, or if that it isn't, then that it's at least amusing.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably not really representative of anything, but it has been 2 fights from Derrick Lewis that he's been the technical guy, and hasn't gotten a knockout. Granted, Blago Ivanov and Ilir Latifi are both quite tough. Ivanov is incredibly durable.
Ivanov is, one of the most disgustingly tough people I've ever seen.
Yeah, and Latifi has been KO'd, a few times. 3 times. I mean, that is some shade on Derrick Lewis, right? Ryan Bader knocked Latifi out with a flying knee. Why couldn't Derrick Lewis, who looks like a fully constructed space station launching off of the ground, not deliver enough impact to knock Latifi out with all of those flying knees he wanted to throw? Looking at you, Derek, with heavy judgment. But I'm still picking you.
I'm actually, now that we've talked about it, I'm actually genuinely looking forward to the first minute 30 of this fight. Because if Olynyk comes out and just windmills hands at Lewis in the same way that he did against Batum, it could be extremely funny.
Dude, his fight with Verdum was awesome.
It was so good.
It was terrible, but it was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. How about the co-main event? This one we puzzled over quite a bit. Chris Weidman versus Omari Akhmadov. The problem here is Akhmadov, this is going to be I think a narrative throughout today's episode, fighters making adjustments. Omari Akhmadov, I've always enjoyed watching him fight. But kind of thought I had him figured out early in his UFC career because he, just got blown up in the 3rd round after gassing himself by both Zaleski dos Santos, isn't too damning, and Sergio Moraes. Just not a great look. You don't want to get slept by Sergio Moraes with punches. Not that he's like a joke or anything, but And it hasn't happened since. And if you look, there's a really clear line of delineation on his record in just fight duration, where all leading up to his UFC debut, basically everything is a 1st round win. And then he gets blown up in the 1st round by Gunnar Nelson, who was just able to athletically take him off his feet and crush him on the ground. No surprise there, really. Then Mats Nilsson, he had a very close fight with. Another 1st round finish because Brian Ebersol blew his knee. And then those 2 3-round fights where he gassed himself and lost. These both being more dangerous fighters by far than Mats Nilsson. Since then, he hasn't gotten a single 1st round finish. But he has definitely gotten over the need to have a 1st round finish. He's settled into a more comfortable pace. I mean, really, like Derrick Lewis, where his adjustment was just stop freaking out when you get taken down. Akhmadov's adjustment was pretty much just stop throwing so much. It's sort of a Tyron Woodley adaptation to having stamina issues. But it has worked pretty well so far. He has become a much more controlled and calm-seeming fighter. And I gotta say, maybe this is just Ian Heinish's role in the UFC now. But like Derek Brunson before him, Omari Akhmadov had probably his best ever UFC performance in beating Ian Heinisch. So yeah, much lower output, but much more controlled. The other side of the equation, which I'm going to let you talk about, Phil, is Chris Weidman. And I'm going to let you talk about it because I don't know what to think about Chris Weidman at all.
No, I mean, there's a clear line you can take on a fight like this, which is that you can look at Akhmadov and you can say, this is a good fighter. This is someone whose game makes sense, someone who has developed it, who looks confident in what they are doing. Mm-hmm. And then you can just look at Chris Weidman's record, and then you say, pick a good fighter to beat this person.
Yeah.
And anyone who wants to do that, I am completely fine with that because there is a very strong chance that Chris Weidman is shot. He had a notably bad performance against Dominic Reyes. I mean, we picked him to get stopped, but he still looked pretty awful.
Yeah.
He didn't appear to have gotten any of the kind of not cutting weight durability benefits of going up to light heavyweight. And instead just got put to sleep almost immediately.
Although granted, I mean, there are less dangerous strikers certainly that he could fight at light heavyweight. And
yeah, I mean,
as we were saying before, the fact that he's now gone right back down to middleweight, it bespeaks a certain flailing mindset.
Yeah,
that Weidman is still trying to adjust and figure out what will work, which maybe means that nothing is going to work as well as it used to.
Yeah, so we were talking a bit before the show, and we were trying to think of people who have had immediately successful transitions to a new weight class, where they haven't looked weird or bad. And I think very few of them it's possible to come up with and be like, oh yeah, that person immediately acclimatized instantly.
Yep.
Because they were fighting someone. A lot of the time when people look good, it's because they're fighting someone from their own weight class.
Right.
Or it's because they're fighting someone who's just much worse than them. Anyone who's gone up and then immediately tried to fight, top level opposition or level opposition basically around the level of the fighter that they are, they often tends to struggle a bit. Things like RDA Safadine, even McGregor against Diaz.
Jose Aldo himself.
Yeah.
Is like still Jose Aldo as we saw in his last fight, but his first fight in the new weight class, he looked like shit.
Yep.
And I was tempted earlier. I pointed out James Krause because he looked so good in that Worley Alves fight. You correctly reminded me that he had a lot of welterweight fights on the Ultimate Fighter and before. And then of course, I just looked at his Wikipedia page and realized that 2 fights before that, he had his welterweight re-debut against Tom Galicchio and didn't look great.
No.
There's always an adjustment period. And it bothers me that people like Chris Weidman and Kevin Lee will have a rough night. Like basically the same thing that happened to them in their previous weight class will happen. And they're like, well, I guess I better go back to cutting weight. I would have liked to see Chris Weidman try to settle in. Because he has been a giant middleweight for his entire career. He's a big guy.
Yeah. Also, these are debatably against some of the best opposition that they've faced. I mean, Dominic Reyes is, by our scoring, should be the light heavyweight champion.
Yeah, he's basically a better striker than anyone that Chris Weidman has faced. I don't know if you want to put him on a par with a much faded Anderson Silva. Obviously that's a high bar, but
as a physical anti-wrestler, it's pretty much
a big guy who's tough to take down and has power and accuracy in his hands. Like, I would have picked Dominic Reyes to beat Chris Weidman at middleweight. I'll tell you that much. Or a reasonable facsimile of Dominic Reyes. I would have picked that style matchup all day. So it's troubling to me that the reactionary fighter's mind always seems to just be like, well, that didn't work. Time to go back to exactly what wasn't working before.
So, getting back to what we expect from this fight, I mean, it's very hard to know what to expect from Chris Weidman because he just looks like he's flailing. I mean, the Kelvin Gastelum fight is the only bright spot, and admittedly, it was a good bright spot because it was one where he got into a lot of trouble and he fought back. But other than that, it looks like he can't maintain a pace for 3 rounds against other middleweights. I mean, getting outworked, starting to go on the downslope that badly against Gegard Mousasi, who has never been a cardio or attritional machine, is not great.
That was one of Weidman's specialty fights, in fact, just like the Rockhold fight, where both guys conspired to make each other look like absolute shit. Not an attractive matchup. Getting outworked by Jacare in the 3rd round, not a great look. I mean, Jacare is still a very tough man, and we saw even in his Hermanson fight that gassed, he is still going to put it all out there. But you don't want to be fighting really well. That's the other thing though. Like, Weidman has made changes. He has tried to adjust his training. He's been working with Mark Henry. I thought his boxing was quite good against Jacare. By the standards of the Chris Weidman we saw before. A lot of jabs. It was, but it was a totally different approach that allowed Jacare to pressure him. And we know that I think fundamentally Weidman does not like being walked down. So, I don't know. He's trying things. Some of them are working. He does still seem to have like a baseline athletic aptitude for picking up new things. But how many of them really like gel with his mindset? Yeah, the thing is this is tough because for all of this, I think Omari Akhmadov is worse than all the other guys that have beaten Chris Weidman. I think he's on the Kelvin Gastelum tier, Would you have picked him to beat any of these guys would you have picked him to beat any of these guys that beat Weidman? Would you have picked this Akhmadov to have beaten that Rockhold, that Romero, that Mousasi, or that Jacare? Because I wouldn't have.
No, I think I only would have picked him over Reyes.
Right. What? My brain immediately heard Gastelum, and I was like, okay, I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a big part of me that like says if these two are remotely like we expect them to look, then Weidman just should be able to patter Akhmadov with strikes from range. One of the things that Weidman has going for him, he's not just big, he is a long middleweight with a huge reach, and that gave Jacare a ton of trouble in that if Weidman, as long as Weidman kept punching, Jacare was like just having to walk through it. Akhmadov is not a defensive savant, and I don't trust him to be able to outpace Weidman.
Weidman does have a hell of a wingspan. Why have I never really put that together? His arms are 6 inches longer across than he is tall.
Yeah, he's only like a few inches short of John Jones, right?
He's 6'2", or they're 4 inches, right? 72 inches is 6 feet. He's 6'2" with a 78-inch reach. That's still quite an ape index on him.
So in a fight where like Akhmadov wants to preserve his gas tank, I would just expect Weidman to just be able to fling shots in from the outside. The difference in this fight is that I think the main problem for Weidman is that Akhmadov is quite good at low kicking jabbers.
Mm-hmm.
But then you got to ask yourself, does Akhmadov defend takedowns that well?
Yeah. And it's kind of tough to know.
Yeah. If he's going to be low kicking or, just slinging right hands, does Weidman just change levels and take him down? Yeah.
Because he was stuffing takedowns from Heinisch and Boch in 2 of his last 3 fights. Neither of these guys are really known for setting up their shots that well. The thing I'm trying to figure out is I used to see Akhmadov as having pretty penetrable takedown defense. And I think it was a product of his style of throwing everything with maximum power and stringing together long combinations to scare people off. And that used to mean that if anybody could trigger one of those sequences, they would catch him with his feet planted really square and just blast him off his feet. And I do think that has changed somewhat. He's no longer this long combination guy, especially against Heinisch. A lot of jabs, a lot of low kicks, a lot of range weapons, occasionally like a counter right hand or a counter left hook. That was also a big weapon against Heinisch. So that may have changed, but again, like we haven't seen it tested against someone who's nearly as good at either just completing takedowns or setting them up as Chris Weidman. So I still feel inclined to pick Weidman, which feels like a terrible idea because he's probably just going to get slept randomly, even if he does well. But I don't see Akhmadov. He's so slow paced now. That has been his main adaptation to get over that. The problem he experienced early in his UFC career has just been to slow things down. And I don't think that Ian Heinisch is quite a good enough parallel to Chris Weidman. For all of the opportunities he presents coming in compared to Weidman, and like the complete lack of diversity in his offense. Weidman also overshadows him there in actually like, having a jab. So I think I'm going to take Weidman. I think the wrestle boxing is going to get it done for him. But I just, you understand my trepidation. I don't trust the man at all.
Yeah. You know what? I think I picked him up Akhmadov over Heinisch. I think I'm going to pick him over Weidman as well.
Yeah.
It's just I was looking at the Jacare fight and I was thinking, if this Chris Weidman showed up to fight Akhmadov, I would pick him to win. But I just don't trust that I can.
But even that Weidman might not show up now.
Yeah, Weidman was just such a confident fighter. I mean, I've said it before on the podcast, the fact that he deliberately didn't renew until after he'd fought Anderson Silva because he knew he was going to win. And just comparing that to the guy we see nowadays.
Yep.
I just think I'm going to go back to my original point. Like, Akhmadov is a good fighter. I don't trust someone who looks like Chris Weidman does nowadays to beat good fighters.
Yeah.
I think if he starts throwing the jab, which is like his safety blanket nowadays, and Akhmadov just starts hacking his leg away, and despite, the fact that Weidman is obviously quite well known for checking leg kicks, he didn't really do it all that much against Jacare when Jacare threw them against him. He ate a reasonable amount of clean low kicks. And I think Akhmadov just does it more and more willingly than Jacare does. I think he's going to win a weird, depressing decision. Yeah.
I mean, Akhmadov's fights have all been relatively close, too. So a certain amount of weirdness is to be expected. Chris Weidman has officially become a middleweight, by the way. All this time he was like a light heavyweight who was cheating with a weight cut. But this man is as unreliable as the greatest middleweights I've ever seen. So this is truly a middleweight co-main event. It's an interesting fight. It's a weird one. It may not even be that entertaining, but I cannot say I'm not intrigued. Okay, let's take a break. Long first segment out of the way. When we come back, we're going to talk about Beneil Dariush versus Scott Holtzman, which I think is a very interesting matchup as well. And Nosferatu Haqparast versus Alexander Munoz before moving on to our recap of Brunson, Shahbazian, Green, Vannata, and more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on through the UFC, whatever number it is, Lewis versus Olynyk undercard here. And that brings us next to the main card opening bout, Beneil Dariush versus Scott Holtzman. Very interesting. I have to admit, I was more intrigued by this matchup, Phil, before you and I talked about it, I think. Because, I'm still intrigued. And I still think there's going to be some dramatic shit that happens almost inevitably, just given these two styles. But you did point out to me that Scott Holtzman has an out-of-control addiction to being taken down and is perhaps lackadaisical about getting out of control positions on the ground. Maybe a little too willing to accept things like, I don't know, bottom half guard or a rear waist cinch from Nick Lentz that he lets Nick Lentz hold on to for 3 minutes. And so, I guess I just spoiled everything, but I'm expecting Beneil Dariush to take him down now, having spoken to you about it, Phil, and watched Beneil Dariush's wrestling game in action. But paint the picture of this fight for me. What's it look like at the beginning of the first round?
One of the things I actually like about this fight, just as a complete random aside, is that back when most people sort of looked on the WEC and the WEC trio and RDA as being the the faces of lightweight, I found it interesting that each one of them had their own protege who was nonetheless still really old. It was like, here's the new, younger generation of this guy's fight camp. And so, like, the MMA lab, you know, they had Benson Henderson, who had been the champ, and then he had a reasonably well-rounded, quite athletic, frustrating decision winner with Scott Holtzman, who was his old prospect who came out.
Uh-huh.
And then there was Cerrone, and his old prospect was Paul Felder.
Right.
And then there was RDA, and his old prospect was Beneil Dariush.
Old long back Benny.
Yeah. And so I find it like weirdly apropos that they get to fight at this point.
Yeah. I like that. You have a gift for spinning narratives. But what about the narrative of the fight itself?
I mean, you basically stole my point, which that Scott Holtzman has become like a much better striker over time.
100%.
He's weirdly someone who just doesn't seem to knock people out very much.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he really, really looks like he should.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
crisp hands.
We've talked about like Edson Barboza and how he looked like his punches hurt, but you could tell there was a kind of whippy snappiness to them that meant that maybe they weren't like clubbing people unconscious.
Yeah.
Scott Holtzman really looks like he should be hurting people. He's enormous. He has good weight transfer.
Mm-hmm.
He's accurate, and no one ever gets knocked out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of them are like, especially in his last few fights, are like counters too, like clean counters, which are also the thing you expect to knock people out when, you know, the punches they see coming don't. And, nope, couldn't even knock out, the 50-year-old Jim Miller. Couldn't even really hurt him. Granted, it's Jim Miller, but still.
So yeah, I mean, I think he is, as you mentioned, he's kind of lackadaisical in grappling situations. I think the one, caveat to this is, sort of in more aggressive clinch situations like the collar tie. I mean, I think it's the hockey background, but he genuinely seems to like throwing punches and elbows from there.
Yep.
That might have been how he finished Alan Patrick, if I'm not wrong. Which is one of his few, and that might make things interesting because Longback Benny does often both attack the double collar tie and use it as a transition into like his other grappling attacks.
Mm-hmm.
But he's still like Dariush is still like a reasonably well-rounded takedown threat.
Yeah, he is.
He's pretty much able to hit anything outside trips, singles, doubles. And just the fact that Holtzman, once he gets into extended clinch exchanges, just seems to sort of wait for the other guy to get bored. There's the main question here is the same one that pops up in a lot of Dariush fights. It's just the durability differential. Right. Dariush's last fight against Drakkar Klose, fantastic, an incredible comeback, very like thrilling to see.
Perhaps my favorite fight of the year so far, really.
Mm-hmm. But also, like, not many people get hurt by Drakkar Klose like that. So that kind of situation pops up.
Yeah. It happens a lot. I mean, he got hurt by, granted, Drew Dober has been hurting people lately, but also that was a very close scrape. A lot of the Dariush wins lately are close scrapes, whereas all of Holtzman wins are just like reliable decisions.
Yeah. And he's crazy durable. Like,
yes, he is.
He's never been stopped with strikes or even can't remember him getting particularly hurt by strikes. And, you know,
right.
He fought Josh Emmett for 3 rounds.
Yeah. And in his fight with Dober, they went to war with each other. You know, for all the points at which Drew Dober was not, as you pointed out grappling him easily. They exchanged a lot of punches. Holtzman exchanges with everyone. And yeah, he rarely even gets hurt. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is I envision this fight in my mind, and I definitely see Dariush getting like rocked. I think Dariush is definitely at his best when he can pressure. And when he can't pressure, it usually takes him some time to settle in, to like sort of find the tools that are going to work for him and make him more comfortable. And Holtzman is usually pretty insistent on pressuring. So I'm imagining him getting Dariush to the fence and countering Dariush's comparatively very slow left hands, just as he did repeatedly to Jim Miller, but Dariush does not even have the chin of a 75-year-old Jim Miller. And so, I see that happening, but also I don't see, given what Dariush has been through recently, and certainly like how he approached his next fight after getting knocked out immediately by Alexander Hernandez, I think I know what switch is going to be triggered in his brain when he gets hurt. Although I don't know. He got hurt by Drakkar Klose and countered him. Maybe saw that he was hurt, and that's what got him to rush. But I would expect that if he were to get hurt by Holtzman, it would put him into grappling mode. And so the big question for me, after you pointed out, and then I stole the point that Dariush was going to wrestle him, was how good is his chain wrestling really? Because that's where Nick Lentz controlled him. That's really what Drew Dober succeeded in doing, was getting into the clinches and then just chaining various attacks together. And the answer is it's pretty good. In fact, basically anything where he's in contact with his opponent, Dariush has a pretty consistent sort of flow to how he approaches that. Whether it's stringing strikes together in a Thai style clinch, or Ryan Wagner's head just exploded, or dropping on a leg, hitting the single, switching to the double, spinning around to the back. It wasn't exactly the most nuanced takedown that he hit on Frank Camacho. It was no one would call it a good back arch throw or anything, but he got to his back well enough and lifted him and flung him down. And like I said, I watched Scott Holtzman just sort of hang out in Nick Lentz's rear waist cinch and allow him to try numerous sweeps and trips and lifts over and over without anything that looked like a really concerted effort to get out. So Dariush gets hurt, Holtzman gets submitted. Sound right?
Yeah, I think I'm going to pick a somewhat ugly decision from Dariush. I'm picking a lot of ugly decisions at the moment. Yeah, I think I like the narrative a lot. I think Holtzman, I think he's so relaxed, and he's also so huge that I think it's going to be difficult to submit him or put him away.
Sure.
I'm also slightly concerned by the fact that just tying up and grappling with him might tire Dariush out, a la the Evan Dunham fight.
And Holtzman's
so we might be getting like an ugly beginning and potentially like a real scrappy end to this fight.
Right. Holtzman does have pretty consistently good stamina. So
yeah. I'm picking Dariush by decision, I think.
That sounds like a good read. Wait till segment 3 where I'm going to come out and then just present that to you as my take and then ask you what you think. That sounds pretty good. Okay, last but not least, Nosferatu Haqparast versus Alexander Munoz. Not Alexander Hernandez, but Alexander Munoz, who you may not know much about, but he beat Nick Newell on the Contender Series. And then I think he had a couple of like cancellations or injuries or something. It's sort of been a delayed UFC debut for him. I have to somewhat recuse myself and say that I've done some private scouting work for one of the guys in this matchup, scouting the other for that one. So if you sense any sort of bias or whatever, that's what that is. But I'm always biased, and I never claim not to be. So really, what's the difference? What do you think, Phil? Give me the rundown.
Munoz does look a lot like Hernandez at the moment.
Sure.
I have to say, from what limited tape I've seen, in that he just seems like he is a fairly natural grappler. He has a lot of confidence. He's very athletic, and he's extremely raw. I'm
pretty sure. I'm not sure. Does Alex Hernandez have a collegiate or high school wrestling background?
I don't know.
I'm
can't remember off the top of my head.
Pretty sure Munoz has a reasonably credible collegiate wrestling background, but I'm going to look into that. Pretty sure, though.
Yeah. But that's sort of who he reminds me of. He's probably, as you said, he's probably a more schooled wrestler, but I think Hernandez made up for that by being just an incredibly naturally gifted scrambler.
Yeah.
And as such, it seems just like a real tough matchup to call for him in this kind of, in this kind of debut. It's like when Hackprest himself had his debut against Held. Like, why would you ever pick this person to win this fight?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a huge experience differential. And unlike Hackprest against Held, there isn't really the athletic ceiling to consider either.
Mm-hmm.
Because Hackprest is also incredibly athletic. I think the main things are, and now I'm going to be the one who's stealing points from you, which
Thank
you
God.
mentioned earlier. We haven't really seen Hackprest against a concerted wrestler or a concerted grappling assault since Held. He did get taken down a bunch in that fight. He managed to scramble out of it most of the time.
Yep.
And as we're going to discuss in segment 3, you shouldn't ever really take prospect improvements for granted.
Right.
That, you can't just be like, well, this person's wrestling defense must have improved since last time, because sometimes it hasn't.
Yes. You are alluding to Edmund Shahbazian, I believe, not making the right calls. To his credit, a lot of time, now I don't know if this means anything for the wrestling in particular, but maybe a sort of general taking things more seriously, making more considered decisions in training and in the fight. A lot of times, there's a reason we look for the prospect loss, right? A lot of times you're not going to make a change until it's demonstrated to you very clearly and definitively that something is not working. And for all that Hawkprost got taken down by Marcin Held and lost a very close decision, you could argue he won that fight. Certainly Hawkprost in his head could believe that he won that fight. It was not until Drew Dobert knocked him out, I think, that he had a result that he couldn't believe, he lost his first fight by a triangle, but no one ever takes their first early few fights that seriously, I don't think. So there's a chance that we'll see a different Hawkprost. I'm really curious to see it. Especially because I think his grappling looked pretty bad against Marcin Held, to be honest. It looked rather shallow, like he had the idea of scrambling free. And you mentioned that he scrambled out a lot of Held's takedowns, but in the third round of that fight, Held he hits like a critical takedown right at the start. He finally figures out like how to set Hawkprost up for a reactive shot without just waiting on him, which is suicidal. And keeps dropping for leg locks because it's Marcin Held from top guard. And this would seem like a bad decision that Hawkprost can get out, but Held just keeps control of one leg, and each time he can't secure the leg lock, he just runs at Hawkprost and stays on top of him. So it's like when the scramble's not available to Hawkprost, I have kind of gotten the impression that he doesn't really know what to do. And I think, as is often the case, that may just be tied to a general, distaste for dancing to the, what feels like dancing to the opponent's tempo, following their lead, being pressured, however you want to phrase it. But like, I'm very curious to see if anything technically will have changed for Hawkprost if he is put down. By the way, Munoz wrestled at OSU, which is, obviously a good wrestling school. But as far as I can tell, it did not have like an incredible record, but still a credentialed collegiate wrestler at a top wrestling school. So it's certainly the best wrestling threat since Marcin Held. It's the only one since Marcin Held, if we're serious.
Yeah, you did mention also there's a tactical flaw in Hackprest which cost him the Dober fight, which we probably want to keep our eyes out for.
I feel like because you're letting me speak that you're setting me up for a punchline.
No, I don't necessarily want to steal your insight. You basically...
please do. That's why we discuss.
It's the raw low kicks.
Yes.
We've seen that in and we've seen Munoz effectively counter them in one of, I think, the fight against, Newell, right?
Yeah. He knocked Newell down and then ran through to finish a takedown off of a naked low kick.
Yep. And it still seems to be a tick for Haqparast is that he throws raw low kicks, particularly when he's on the back foot.
Right. I always hate that. So many fighters do that, but definitely Haqparast does that.
It's just like, I got to do something with my feet.
I'm back up.
Kick at this guy.
I think they get backed up to the cage, and then they're like, all right, well, I'm supposed to surge forward. I'm not supposed to be here, but the other guy's waiting for me to surge forward. I'm going to do a long range thing. And they just do that probing low kick. I think that's the logic, but it is a common occurrence that you will see fighters who don't even kick that often fire a naked low kick once their back is within like 2 feet of the wall. I don't know. It's usually a bad idea. It's usually the one that gets countered because the other person knows you can't scurry away. So yeah, that's a thing. There is also the fact that those don't even have to be countered by punches. They're takedown opportunities. Haqparast is like he really is like a stunning athlete. Like he's a guy who will fight to the point of utter exhaustion, and it just doesn't make that much of a difference in how he performs compared to lesser athletes. He has this incredibly firm like first layer everywhere. You know, so whether it's the first layer takedown attempt, if Nosferatu Haqparast sees anything coming, he is going to make you pay for it. It's very difficult to get one over on him if you're not like bringing layers to the table. And that's what I don't know about Munoz. Like I don't know how nuanced he can be if, for example, Haqparast does what he really likes to do and just sort of like shuffles around on the outside and tries to walk him into left hands.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things about this fight is that Haqparast seems like a particularly bad fight for a debuting
the experience.
For debuting young prospect, because one of the things that people have to get used to in the UFC is the general level of kind of physicality, durability, aggression, and everything that just happens on a regular basis in the UFC. And Haqparast will come out and he will immediately just crank the dials up as high as they can go. And he will do it with complete confidence. Yeah. So Munoz will immediately find himself locked into a life and death battle with someone who is probably a better athlete than anyone he's ever fought by a significant margin.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see. So, maybe that has changed from Haqparast. We don't know how this how he mentally responds to what Drew Dober did to him. That was something totally unlike anything that's, I'm sure, ever happened to him. So, we'll see. It's interesting. But yeah, Haqparast is not only definitely a UFC caliber athlete, like top flight in his division, but has also had now 5 UFC fights, against a range of quality fighters. And Munoz is what, like 6-0?
Yep.
And the best guy he's beaten is Nick Newell, who is a good fighter and has a really tricky style. I still think it's always impressive for anyone to beat Nick Newell, but it's also kind of hard to parallel like the things that you feel comfortable doing against a guy is only going to hit you with one of his hands. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm very much looking forward to it. I have big questions about Haqparast. I think Munoz is poised to probe and possibly answer some of those questions. But I don't know. I guess I'll recuse myself from picking. But what are you thinking? You're going to pick Haqparast?
Yeah, probably by an early, I think second round stoppage. I think he'll be a little less aggressive than he normally is, but I still think that's just something that he does.
He's done that before too. Like he was very wary of. I think the real problem that Drew Dober gave him is that Dober pressured super hard.
Yeah.
And forced exchanges. But when he had a similarly dangerous puncher in Joaquim Silva, who was content to sort of wait and see himself, Haqparast was very patient, in fact. Pretty much the entire first round, he just pressured with feints and footwork and tried to get a look at what openings Silva was gonna create for him. So yeah, I think that doesn't sound like a crazy call at all. Let's take one more break, shall we? And when we come back, Derek Brunson, Edmund Shahbazian, Bobby Green, Lando Vannata, you've heard me say this before. We're actually going to say more about it after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description, you know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. You just want to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
I feel like we're on a roll. Okay, we're back. Derek Brunson, Edmund Shahbazian. Phil, I teased at the top of the show, but I have to give you immense credit. Listeners will know that we have shielded our egos from any harm by constantly pretending that we don't care about picking fights correctly. We just care about seeing the shape of the fight. So we didn't pick this fight correctly. We both thought Shahbazian was just going to find too many too many openings in Derek Brunson's everything, and crack him with something, basically. But you did say that one of your major hangups about picking Shahbazian was you didn't know how his jab was going to look, and we both agreed that was critical because Shahbazian's game is his jab. It is a very important part of everything we've seen him do up to this point. All of the knockouts, all the knockdowns to submissions, all of those big impactful moments have been set up by the jab. And your question was, does Shahbazian, like Jack Hermanson, erroneously believe, for whatever reason, and I think we can talk about that the jab is not available to him against a southpaw? And I even asked, I was like, well, maybe, Derek Brunson is technically a southpaw. I'm pretty sure he's left-handed, but come on, even a new and improved Derek Brunson is going to offer openings for a subtle and quick weapon such as the jab. So maybe Shahbazian is just going to see that it's there, and that's how his game functions, and he's going to use it. That didn't happen. Either Terverdian or someone, I'm really would like to blame Edmund Terverdian, but either his coaches told him that it wasn't going to be available, that he should focus on landing his right hand, or the dynamic of facing a southpaw where it is genuinely different, not impossible at all, but different, getting in and landing your jab from a longer range with the opponent's lead obstructing yours. Either the coaching or the circumstances conspired to convince him to basically do nothing but throw big leaping right hands. And Derek Brunson was even more new and improved and really took him to school, to be honest. I thought it was an amazing performance from Derek Brunson, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, so there were really two elements of Shahbazian's performance which could potentially have been picked up on, but which we mentioned, but we were like, I'm just not sure if we can pick Derek Brunson to survive the early going. And yeah, the first one was the southpaw, and the second one was the jabbing in the open stance matchup, and the second one was
clinch breaks.
Well, it was the physicality matchup.
Right.
It was like, we've never seen him go outside. We've only seen him go outside the first round once, and then he got physically overwhelmed by Darren Stewart.
And got really tired.
Is that going to happen again?
Got 10-8'd.
Yeah. But yeah, let's go back to the jab, because this was strange. I mean, firstly, credit to Derek Brunson. His defense looked better. He still sort of lumbered around a bit and did ugly Derek Brunson foot crossing things, and
every time he did that, I was internally screaming. Every time Derek Brunson lifts up one leg and completely, like, as if nothing bad will ever happen to him or ever has, just lazily sets it down and decides, maybe I won't throw that kick. Why are you not jabbing him in the face, Edmund?
It's when he puts his foot down from a kick, and then he'll just walk like a regular person around for a bit, and then he'll resume his fighting stance.
Derek Brunson's footwork is a miracle.
I love Derek Brunson.
Yeah. But yes.
But he still did a better job of maintaining his range. He was actually genuinely kind of hand fighting with his right hand. He at one point extremely comedically out-jabbed Shahbazian?
Oh, he out-jabbed him the entire fight. Once the first round was over, Henry Hooft was like, hit him with the jab. Interrupt him with the jab when he leaps in and then push him back with the jab and do jabs. And Derek Brunson landed a lot of them.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it was a few things. Shahbazian does look extremely, I mean, he's an extremely trained fighter.
Yeah.
We know from all the stories, he is a gym rat. He loves being in the gym. He looks very schooled when he is striking in a way which Derek Brunson still, even though Derek Brunson won this fight, doesn't. Derek Brunson looks like he's trying very hard to be schooled.
That's right.
That's kind of the difference. But so yeah, I think he probably wasn't. I think he wasn't trained to use his lead hand much in the open stance matchup. I think, yeah, possibly because Daverdian has internalized that piece of MMA logic. He's incredibly young and he just hasn't fought a southpaw before. And I think in all cases where someone is incredibly uncomfortable in MMA fights, pretty much, it tends to distort their sense of distance.
Oh yeah, that's the first thing to go, 100%.
And I think he found himself in a somewhat uncomfortable open stance matchup against a big, powerful person. And he was just like, I've got to, if I'm closing the distance, it has to be with something big. But this, of course, meant that he was in a matchup of explosion and covering distance with Derek Brunson.
Mm-hmm.
And it also meant that just like when he burst forward, Brunson just kind of had to stand there. And then they were in the clinch.
Yep. And I think I may have mentioned last week as well. I thought this is what you were getting at before. Not just the physicality aspect, but Darren Stewart also cracked Shahbazian with a lot of good elbows on clinch breaks. Yep, Derek Brunson found those. He proved to just be not only the stronger wrestler, obviously, but just a better clinch fighter. Just a little more like urgent and aware, I think, of where the openings were. Yeah, I don't know. Looking at it now, I'm watching it yet again. It really does feel like Shahbazian was told not to jab. Because it's not just right hands, but it's left hooks, which is like,
yeah, that's
like the cool, hipster version of this is the punch that works against southpaws, which me being a cool hipster, I have dipped a toe into that pond before. It's a very tricky punch to see coming. It comes over the shoulder. It's, people don't expect it as much as they do the classically advised cross. And, Shahbazian seemed to come into this fight thinking he was going to switch up between these two threats. And that was going to be how he would get Derek Brunson. Let me tell you something about Derek Brunson though, Phil. He has learned to duck his head. And it has made all the difference. I noted last week that he was actually countering Ian Heinisch, who, granted, very predictable, just comes in with the same right hand. But hey, if you're Shahbazian and you're going to put yourself on Heinisch's level by reducing your game to these two power punches, Derek Brunson is now a fighter who will, wait on you and make you miss. He realizes that the defense is truly its own reward, and it creates openings. It keeps you safe. It tires the other guy out and damages his confidence. There's all kinds of reasons to not let the other dude just haul off and hit you in the mouth. And Derek Brunson has learned to duck and slip. Not all that well, but he can time it. And as long as he can time it, if you're Shahbazian eschewing the jab, you are basically just ignoring all of your setups for these techniques. And so Derek Brunson had really no difficulty after about the midpoint of the fight, just ducking right under every left hook and big right hand that Shahbazian threw at him. And then obviously the wrestling, I loved how it was integrated. I thought Derek Brunson twice took Shahbazian down with that just really subtle, smooth foot sweep from the rear waist cinch. That was awesome. Savage fucking crushing ground and pound. We saw that in Shahbazian's fight with Darren Stewart as well. So that was definitely a sort of echo of something that had happened to him before. But yeah, I know. I do find it mystifying that Shahbazian, I don't understand why, you would ever think it's a good idea And obviously I'm speaking from a comfortable position. And, and I suggested before, maybe he had a hard time finding southpaw sparring partners, given, the pandemic and everything. We don't know what circumstances there were, but it does always frustrate me when a fighter's solution to like a different style matchup is to fundamentally change their own game. If my game is built around a jab to control distance and draw things out and set up my damaging shots, I don't think it's a good idea I should be thinking, how do I make the jab work? Because my game is built on it. Not, okay, the jab's not going to work. What else can I do? And that's what it felt like. It felt like a very aimless performance from Shahbazian, and in contrast, a very deliberate and purposeful performance from Derek Brunson, whom I love seeing get better, and I love seeing him win. He seemed so sincerely and earnestly happy afterwards. He had a nice big hug with Henry Hooft. He was excited to go home and see his family, because that was the main thing, I think, that kept him training in South Carolina all those years. He wanted to be around his daughter, I believe. And he, talked about being at a training camp in Florida for like 8 weeks, and it helped him to be professional, but I'm sure it was a sacrifice. He was no longer spending time with his family, which he clearly cares a lot about. And, I love seeing it pay off, man. I find it very heartening seeing Derek Brunson have this third great stage of his legendary career.
Mm-hmm.
And I shouted out your old nickname for him, Phil, from the League of Extraordinary Journeyman days. Do you recall your moniker for Derek Brunson?
The anglerfish rises again.
That's right. I think this was the ultimate anglerfish bait, was getting used as a doorstep by all of these up-and-coming title contenders. It was all a ruse.
Yep. I mean, because this is the thing. He's had such distinct portions of his career that no one can even remember that people used to absolutely hate Derek Brunson for being incredibly boring.
Right. Yeah, he used to be a sport-killing Jackson Wink fighter. And then he was a guy who blew up if he couldn't obliterate you in a minute, and now he's like a weird sort of fusion of all of those, just with like the same bad footwork from the post-Jackson Wink era.
Yeah, he rules.
He's awesome, man. I love it. Do you know what that bastard Zane Simon tried to tell me last week? He was questioning whether Derek Brunson was a power puncher.
I think I remember hearing this on the Vivisection, yes.
He hits very hard. He's just not usually subtle. So he doesn't knock you out unless you get scared immediately. But look at the way every shot he landed on Shahbazian. Yeah. Was like a cannon.
You don't knock people out from guard, basically.
Right.
I think it was mount, but still. No, it was half guard.
He virtually knocked.
Derek Brunson is a huge puncher. Yes.
Yeah, he virtually knocked Shahbazian out from his guard in this fight.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Shahbazian was clearly out.
Yeah.
And yes, they should have also stopped that fight.
Yes, although I did feel that Herb Dean went some very small distance for redeeming last week's abysmal stoppage, because he picked, if it was going to be up to the referee to stop it mid-fight, he picked the right moment.
Yep. Yeah, I thought he actually genuinely did a good job here, but yeah, they should have just been like, you're 22, you're going to live to fight another day, right? Let's not leave you out there to take a career-ending beating. You're clearly absolutely done. Yep.
And they made the wise decision of leaving that decision in Herb Dean's capable hands. And somehow it worked out for them. Okay. Couple more. We'll make these relatively quick hits. Or is it really just one more that we want to hit? I think it is. Cause this card got absolutely ravaged. Like, Ed Herman, Gerald Meerschaert. Meerschaert got asymptomatic COVID. And couldn't fight. And Ed Herman got a measly $10,000 for doing a training camp and cutting weight and showing up to, where was this one taking place? This was at the Apex. Even so. Not even close to his show money. So.
No.
That sucks. That's a huge slap in the face. I'm not surprised, but it does make me mad.
Man, you know that Kevin Holland was calling out Ed Herman, right?
Oh, yeah. They should have done that.
Fight would have ruled.
They should have done that. 100%. Imagine Kevin Holland just, like, trying over and over and failing to take Ed Herman down. while being really mad that Ed Herman is insisting on this grappling match with him.
Yeah, and eventually like punching Ed Herman like 6 times whilst Ed Herman's fist slowly arcs through the air and then puts him down.
I got to tell you 3 times over the last week, I was imagining time-lapse Herman Mearshart and cracking up. It's such a funny image. But yeah, so we lost, like, truly for this show in particular, it was a rough series of cancellations. But we did get Bobby Green versus Lando Vannata too. It was every bit as thrilling a fight as their first one. And I was really interested in this because I wanted to see, you know, like Lando 2.0. I thought he made a definite shift in approach, over those last like 3 fights. And as you mentioned earlier about, changing weight classes, I think changing styles, similarly, it really takes some time to sort of settle in. We see that a lot. Like, this is something that son of a bitch Zane and I bring up frequently on the Vivisection is, fighters like, for example, Lauren Murphy, who sort of seemed to invest in technical improvement and look really clunky for a while. And then suddenly they have a fight where it all comes together and they look really smooth and composed. And, I thought for Lando Vannata, that was the Yancy Medeiros fight. And to be honest, coming into this one, I thought he started it off looking pretty good. Off the back foot, drawing things out. Green hit him, surprised him with a few jabs early, but then Vannata seemed to kind of get a read on that. He started to land his own jab a bit. He started to counter off of his defense, and it seemed to be going okay. He landed the first really big shot of the fight, on Bobby Green and dropped him for just a split second. And then, I don't know, do you have a theory on what went wrong? Because something happened and Lando Vannata, to my eyes, basically reverted to Lando Classic.
I mean, I guess the main thing is, with Lando Vannata, you gotta be like, what's his punch? Like, what does he actually, like, what does he do?
Right.
What is his primary weapon? And I think what we saw in the Medeiros fight is that he decided he was going to be much more of a counterpuncher, because what he did before, we sort of spoken about it previously, is that he, you know, hops on his lead leg and then comes in with either like a stomp or an oblique kick or just a big, like, booming left hook overhand.
And as long as you stand there waiting, he's going to surprise you with whatever his choice is.
Yeah. And he was just going to hop in and come with like one of 3 or 4 preset like attacks, but he wasn't going to do it with a great deal of defense. It was going to disintegrate once he was on the inside, and he couldn't maintain it for 3 rounds.
Yeah,
meaning that he would generally hit the other guy with something pretty hard early, and would then just sort of run out of ideas. I think against Medeiros, we saw against someone who has some parallels with Bobby Green,
right?
In that this is just a tall, somewhat foot slow, hurtable, but dangerous fighter, and saw Vannata able to just like leverage a speed edge against him almost the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main difference is that Bobby Green is just way more crafty than Yancy Medeiros is.
That, like, I mean, he certainly early on started to find ways through Lando's like 2 or 3 defensive moves. We'd be like, oh, he's slipping this way, I'm just going to aim the jab that way, and he's going to duck right into it. A lot of stuff like that started to happen.
Yeah, and it's also that he can integrate defensive maneuvers into what he's doing, often like imperfectly, but he's going to parry, he's going to slip, he's going to counter counters in a way which Yancy Medeiros simply is not. Yancy's only defense is his reach. And once he's in exchanges, he's just in exchanges.
Yeah.
And so I think this was the problem for Vannata in that he was like stepping into this world of being like a technician when he fought Medeiros. And then when he fought Green, like Green's been being a technician his entire career. He was just far deeper at it. And Green, the other thing about Green is that he's someone that you can't just wait on him, because he's a he's a very long fighter. He feints a lot. He's, as you mentioned, he's extremely accurate at tagging up lazy head movement.
Mm-hmm.
Vannata couldn't use the wrestling in the back pocket, as he could against Medeiros.
Right.
So, I mean, it was bizarre because, Vannata is obviously, in many ways, has become a better fighter,
mm-hmm.
but this style matchup this change just made him a far easier style matchup for Bobby Green.
Yeah. I almost feel like that was a result of it, because I don't think it was consistently, it was not the same amount of patience that we saw. I mean, you mentioned the danger and perhaps of waiting on Bobby Green. I don't know. I kind of think sometimes the opposite is true, where like when you actually go after Bobby Green, you persuade him to fight you. So I'm not 100% sure it was that. I did see Vannata doing, a lot more back foot, a lot more patient work in the early going. And I just wonder if he, has not had time to develop the technical depth required to keep up with Green's adjustments. Like, for example, it would have been great if he had used a lot more feints, maybe try to draw out that jab from an even safer distance, and sort of figure out Green's timing a little more, rather than just sort of sidling forward as he started to do and wait for the jab and, let Bobby Green play games with anticipating your head movement. But it also felt to me like he just ended up having the same fight with Bobby Green that he had last time, which the shape of that fight was Vannata having all this early success, Green adjusting, and it just starting to get worse and worse. And this time he just like delayed. It was like the anti-Yoel Romero. Like he delayed the fight that he narrowly got the better of last time. Or I guess it resulted in a draw. He delayed that like 2 extra minutes. And that was all it took for Bobby Green to just beat him for 2 more minutes in total. I mean, in fact, it was more than that because, despite having what I might describe as like a better early going against Green than he had the first time, in like the first couple minutes, he also got absolutely beaten up in the 3rd round. So it ended up being a much more emphatic win for Green. I don't know. To me, it raises an interesting discussion about adjustments, ensuring that adjustments actually stick to the fighter making them. Because for Vannata, it's a question of, is it technical depth that's lacking, or is maybe that Lando Vannata is in there and he has not managed to frame this back foot counterfighting style in a way that enables him to comfortably do it against an opponent who can really poke holes in his technique.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also just, I think it's just it's the fact that these 2 fights between them also draw the arc you would sort of expect between them. I mean, it's Vannata is the kind of guy who's going to have success early, and Bobby Green is the deeper guy who's going to have
always
success down the stretch because he's just, he's just better. And he's more of a confident technician.
Yeah.
He believes and loves his own style, and that's 100%. Never really changed. And so that, their fights are basically like Vannata does well and then Bobby Green takes over. But that's also the story outside the fights, is that, the first one was pretty close between them because Vannata's success early was much more pronounced. And the second one is just more in Bobby Green's favor. And it's kind of like Vannata isn't young enough to be able to, it seems, make the difference.
Yeah.
Be able to make up any kind of athletic difference between the two. So I think, just the fact that Bobby Green is just better than him, he's just gonna play. And until they fight again, 15 years from now, or whenever it's gonna be, in some incredibly depressing, pointless trilogy fight where Vannata knocks him out. Yeah. Because that's the rule.
That's the rule. Well, we're nearing the point where we have to wrap up the show. So, I just want to ask you one sort of very, very thinly related question. As I shouted out last week, I was on, whatever the Fight Side podcast is called. I should have found that out in the interim, with, Danny Martin and Sriram. And Danny brought up an example that I myself have earnestly used, which is the Dillashaw-Garbrandt tetherball match that they had on the Ultimate Fighter. Do you remember that?
I don't, but I have heard of it.
It perfectly paralleled the dynamic between them as fighters, where Cody Garbrandt got this big early lead, and then Dillashaw had to like analyze and think about it, and then Garbrandt got really fucking frustrated that Dillashaw had made a successful adjustment, and everything fell apart, and he lost like 6 points in a row and lost the game. Do you think what would happen if Lando Vannata and Bobby Green played tetherball is my question. Do you think this dynamic extends beyond MMA? And if so, would a third fight be even more one-sided for Bobby Green, no matter what Lando Vannata tried to do in the interim?
Yeah, right? I reckon so.
It's just an innately like personality-driven thing for both of them, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe not if it was something like tetherball, because I think Bobby Green has a tremendous amount of pride in being a well-rounded, like, good MMA fighter. You know, he is the classic old young veteran. Yeah. He is just a veteran now.
Yes.
But he's always been that guy. And I think Vannata just liked doing cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. And
now he's really trying to find that place to be. So, I mean, maybe if they were playing tetherball, Bobby Green would just be like, this sucks. Sports for dumb people. And Vannata would just whoop up on him because he wanted to look cool winning at tetherball.
You think Lando views MMA as a whole as more of like a party trick?
Mm-hmm.
That might be true. Okay. Interesting points all across today's episode. And I hope that you out there listening enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed making it. Phil, have you produced anything? No. Have you read anything?
I have, since he is apparently working on another one. I've been reading Danny Martin's latest article on MMA metagame adjustments, which is, I think, actually like a month old at this point, but I haven't got around to it yet, but it is very good. And that's what I've been reading lately. Cool.
Well, I guess I will just go ahead and shout out again. I believe it was the Fight Site podcast. And I was on there with Danny and Shuram, and we had a really good discussion about both in-fight and career-long adjustments and style shifts and how they endure when they don't. And it was a lot of fun. And we talked about tetherball on that one, too. So if that was your favorite part of this episode, you are in luck, and you should go check that out. Otherwise, thank you all so much for listening. Coming up soon, the fight that Phil repeatedly keeps thinking is just around the corner. We've hit a real...
I just want it to be over.
We've hit a real lull in the sort of quarantine UFC era, pandemic era card quality, I think. And it's really dragged out the wait. But at last, Miocic Cormier 3 is upon us. I'm still reasonably excited for this one. It seems like every other person in the quote-unquote analyst community is like really mad about this. But I don't know what the fuck else you're going to do at heavyweight. You know, it's fine. I'm going to be excited to talk about it. So if you want to hear the rare occasion of me having more fun than Phil, tune into next week's episode. Until then, reach out to us on social media. You can find Phil on Twitter at EvilGregJackson and myself at BoxingBush, spelled B-U-S-C-H. And, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.